Hello, Bob Reedfield here, preaching and teaching minister of the Spring Hill Christian Church of Royal Oak, Lockney. Welcome back to our study of a survey of the New Testament. We gave some introductory materials, so there's still plenty of time for you to get into this study. We kind of gave some introductory material information. If you want some of that, especially the ones that I said, I got a lot of handouts that I couldn't go through with any detail. If you want that, just email me at dr, as in doctor, dr.rietveld@gmail.com, and I'll be more than happy to send them to you via email attachment in response to your email request. Then we talked a little bit about an introduction to the study of the New Testament, and then we started our section of the New Testament on the Gospels, the biographies, and we looked and covered the book of Matthew last week. And so today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be continuing in the Gospel. Remember the Gospel, there's only one Gospel told from four different viewpoints. And so Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we looked at Matthew last week, and so this week we're going to talk about the Gospel according to Mark. Some general information about the meaning of the book. The meaning in Hebrew, it means Jehovah is gracious. In Latin, it means a large hammer. The book of Mark narrates the things Jesus did rather than the things that he said. If you remember, the book of Matthew contains the most of the stuff that Jesus said. Here in the book of Mark is a narration of the things rather that Jesus did than the things he said. Now, there are some renditions of what Jesus said in there as well, but not so much as close as it was in the book of Matthew. It's the shortest of the four Gospels. It's held in low esteem. In early centuries, first known commentary on the Gospel of Mark is by Victor of Antioch in 400 to 500 AD, who tried to find other commentaries on Mark and could not. The major concern is the superhuman power of Jesus, demonstrating Jesus' deity by his miracles. It was written for Roman Christians who are impressed by acts of power. Its many graphic details point to an eyewitness author. Mark is dependent on others. Peter is his source. He fills in the outlines of Peter in Acts chapter 10, verses 36 through 43. And so the book of Mark, the author, we've alluded to this already, is Mark. Papias testimony about him writing what he heard from Peter seems to be true. The man Mark, the name was John Mark. John, his Jewish name, Mark, his Roman name, the son of Mary, rather well-to-do, not Mary, the mother of Jesus, had servants. We can see that in Acts chapter 12. The church met in her home to pray for Peter, who was in jail. Cousin of Barnabas in Colossians 4:12, we can see that. He accompanied Paul and Barnabas on the first missionary journey. We look in Acts chapter 13, verse 5. He went back home from Perga. We looked at in Acts chapter 13, verse 13. He went with Paul and Barnabas, with Paul and Silas, went with Barnabas when Paul and Silas went on second missionary journey. And we can find that in Acts chapter 15, verses 37 through 40. Let me say that again. Mark went with Barnabas when Paul and Silas went on Paul's second missionary journey. He fled from the Garden of Gethsemane without his underwear. Mark chapter 14, verses 51, a reference to the birthday suit. Let's go ahead and take a look at that, just out of curiosity. I know you're all going to stop this tape and look at it anyway, so we might as well look at it together. Mark chapter 14, verse 51, talking about the betrayal and the arrest. A young man was following him wearing nothing but a linen sheet over his naked body, and they seized him. But he pulled free of the linen sheet and escaped naked. Now, how many of you have, when looking at the telling of the Garden of Gethsemane, have ever thought about those two verses and thought about that? It's not the first time I've read it, obviously, but that's just something that you don't focus on, but it's just kind of a trivial thing there. He was a companion and a co-worker of Paul when Paul was in prison in Rome the first time. We look at Philemon, verse 24. He's with Peter in Rome when wrote his first letter, 1 Peter 5:13. Papias, 130 AD, writes of the tradition he heard from church leaders that Mark was Peter's interpreter and wrote down things he heard Peter say. An example of a person who failed and then later made it. Tradition says that Mark went to Egypt and started churches in Alexandria. The date of Mark is 67 to 68 AD, written before the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. We can look at Mark chapter 13 for that. When Paul wrote Romans in 56 AD, no apostle had visited Rome yet. We see that in chapter 1, verses 11 through 13 of Romans. It's unlikely that Peter arrived in Rome before the persecution of Nero in 64 AD. Irenaeus says Mark wrote what Peter had said after Peter had departed. Eason says 50 to 60 AD. Without proof, he says Mark was written first. Bratt says because Mark is like Matthew and Luke, it must be last. Eason says on some same reasoning that it must be first. So not a lot of evidence there. The period that is covered in the book of Mark is the ministry of Jesus from his baptism to his ascension. The purpose is to show that Jesus of Nazareth is the Almighty King, the heroic master of life, the invincible conqueror of death. The historical setting is the Roman Empire is the world force with Greek as the national language. Mark covers from Jesus' baptism to his ascension as he explains Jesus' authority and mission. The recipients were Gentiles and Romans, Christians. The key word or idea that might be is that Jesus is king straightway. A key verse in Mark would be Mark 10:45. For the Son of Man did not come to be saved, but to save and to give his life a ransom for many. Some of the key concepts is that Christ's servant leadership example, his power and authority, his service and ministry, his daily life. Today is God's time. Examples in chapter 10, verses 1 through 12, talk about people flocked to him and he taught them on divorce. Verses 13 through 16, kids are his kind of people. 17 through 27, it's hard for the rich to go to heaven. Verses 28 through 31, the first shall be last. Verses 32 through 40, are you able to drink of my cup? It's Calvary, I die. Before Pentecost, we help others. Verses 46 through 52, we have blind Bartimaeus. And so it shows his power, authority, his service, and ministry. The examples in the book of Mark chapter 10. Straightway is a key concept. Today is God's time. 2 Corinthians 6:2. Now is the day of salvation, or today is the day of salvation. Hebrews 3:7 and 15. Today hear the voice of God. Hebrews 3:13. Encourage one another as long as it is still today. Mark 1:10. Baptism is approved by God. Jesus' baptism. People followed Jesus. 1:18, Peter and Andrew. 1:20, James and John. Chapter 2:2, a crowd heard he was in town and gathered together. he was worshipped appropriately. Chapter 1, verse 21. He entered the synagogues on the Sabbath. People recognized Jesus. Mark 6:54, people after he got out of the boat. And then in 9:15, the crowd after the transfiguration. We see in in 11:3, that people helped Jesus. The colt for his triumphal entry. We have miracles that occurred. The woman's hemorrhage stopped. The 12-year-old dead girl raised to life. After he fed the 4,000, he left by boat. When the work was done, he'd leave. After the 5,000 were fed, he sent away his disciples. After the 4,000 were fed, he left by boat. His enemies reacted against him, is recorded in Mark. The Pharisees, after the healing of the withered hand on the Sabbath. Salome asked for John the Baptist's head. The demon who threw the boy to the ground. The kiss of Judas, the counsels of illegal trial. It talks about those in need ask for help. Father said, I believe, help my unbelief. Therefore, Christ didn't put off what he knew he needed to know. And that's basically what the book of Mark is all about. Now, I know that was just a short overview, and that's kind of how we're going to deal with a lot of the books in the New Testament. We wouldn't be able to, this is just a survey, remember, of the New Testament, and so we have to do that in order to be able to get completely through the book of Revelation. So I hope that's whet your appetite enough to go ahead and study the book of Mark. And I hope you enjoyed this lesson as much as I have enjoyed presenting it to you. Hope you have a great rest of the week, and may God bless you.